Where's your phone?
Can't start until 6:51. And the YouTube, you're going to do? Separate?
It's gonna give you the
Great. Okay. Start. A big Yeshivat to Shane Safran, who's arranging these live stream shiurim. Today we're going to speak about the Haggadah and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, both on a theoretical plane, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and on a practical plane, how we're mekayim through the Haggadah. And the goal of this shiur is to gain a better appreciation of the Haggadah as a whole, as an introduction to be able to then learn all kinds of individual parts of the Haggadah. And since we're sitting here in a makeshift Beit Midrash, we'd like to ask Gabi, please make sure people downstairs know the shiur is going on, and they should please keep it down, so this way people can hear the shiur. Okay. When one talks about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, I think there are two methodological questions about its relationship with other mitzvot that to a large extent are contrasts to each other. I'll explain what I mean. On the one hand, we need to ask about the relationship between Sipur and a mitzvah that doesn't take place at the same time, but is very similar to it. On the other hand, we have to ask ourselves about the relationship between Sipur and other mitzvot that are very different, but that coincide with it. And anytime we find mitzvot that coincide with each other, we have to ask ourselves whether that coincidence is coincidental or incidental. We always say, Al tikre coincidence, elo coincidence. You have to wonder whether God is the one who's bringing together the way things happen. So on the one hand, we ask ourselves about Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, how does it relate and compare to the very similar mitzvah we have all year round? If we take a look at our Makorah sheets, we all know the Mishnah in Brachot Daf Yud Beis Bet, which says, Maskirin Yetziat Mitzrayim Balelot. And it's not just Balelot, the Chiddush of the Mishnah is that also Balelot. So there's a mitzvah to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim every day. So in what way is the Seder night unique and different? The Pri Megadim asked this question. The Minchat Chinuch asks the question in a very similar way, using the formulation of Manishtana. In what way is the night of Seder any better, any greater, any different than every night of the year? Why do we have a special mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim on the Seder night? Don't we have it every single day and every single night? So that's one side of the question, one of the two methodological questions. The second question, and again, to a large extent, it may answer the first one, and it's a contrast to the first one, is how does the mitzvah of Sipur relate to the other mitzvah that it coincides with? Sipur falls out on the night of Tetvav, when we also have Pesach, Matzah, Maror. Are they connected, or do they coincidentally happen to fall out at the same time? So to a certain extent, the questions may answer each other. It could be that if Sipur is connected to these mitzvahs, that's exactly how it's different than Zechira. So the questions are flip sides of one another, but both questions that need to be asked. I believe that this question, the first one, about the relationship between Sipur and Zechira, is a question that's sharpened even more according to the Shita of the Rambam, particularly according to the way the Zohar Harakia and the Karen Ora understand the Rambam. First, let's understand what's unique about the Shita Rambam, particularly what the problem is in the Shita of the Rambam. If we take a look at the sources here in the continuation of page 1, the Rambam in Hilchot Kriyat Shema, Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel, the Rambam there writes beferish that there's a mitzvah lahazki Yetziat Mitzrayim b'yom u'v'layla. There's a mitzvah every day, like we saw in the Mishnah in Brachot. On the other hand, the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvah does not mention this mitzvah to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim every day and every night. The next source, Sefer HaMitzvah Asei Kuf Nun Zayin, the Rambam only mentions the mitzvah, the Safer Yetziat Mitzrayim, on the Seder night. And the obvious question is, what happened to the mitzvah of Zechira Yetziat Mitzrayim? Why does the Rambam not mention it in the Sefer HaMitzvah? There are many different suggestions that have been suggested for the Rambam. Many of them I think are speculative, and you wonder to what extent they're correct or incorrect. I'll just mention a few of them before I get to the explanation of the Zohar Harakia. I think has a lot of basis in the Rambam. So many said maybe this isn't a mitzvah that you count. Zechira Mitzrayim is a mitzvah, but not one that you count. For example, Reb Chaim famously said it doesn't apply to Doros because it doesn't apply in Yemos HaMashiach, but we have the name of the Yeshivat Mashiach, so that's why we don't count. Obviously the question on that is, a lot of things change in Yemos HaMashiach, yet we count them as mitzvot. And on the other hand, there were things that there were mitzvot that were only in the midbar. Meaning, so how do we know what does apply or doesn't apply in the Doros? Something that applies in all generations up to Yemos HaMashiach, or is a mitzvah. Another approach that was given, also quoted in Reb Chaim, is that the mitzvah of Zechira Yetziat Mitzrayim is included in another mitzvah. What mitzvah would that be? So Reb Chaim suggested it's included in the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. Rav Soloveitchik, in the famous Yortzeit Shir of his, said that the reason Zechir Siyam is included in the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema is because the common goal is Kabbalah Malchus Shamayim. And that's why it's all one mitzvah. And he brought a raya from this from the Rambam that we read a few minutes ago, Hilchos Kriyas Shema, Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel, where the Rambam, after mentioning the chiyuv of the Zechir Siyam Mitzrayim, concludes the halacha by saying, Zehi Hanikras Kriyas Shema. This is Kriyas Shema. I don't know how much of a raya that is. The Rambam, we know, defines his terms everywhere. He's just defining what we call Kriyas Shema. It includes the third parsha. So all these approaches are not pasha. The Zohar Harakia that the Rashba, if you look at the next source here, he says that the reason the Rambam doesn't count Zechira as a separate mitzvah is because it's included in the mitzvah of Sipur. Meaning, there's a mitzvah on the Seder night to remember Mitzrayim, and the mitzvah the rest of the year is a continuation / extension of that mitzvah. This approach is suggested also by the Keren Orah, one of the famous Achronim, and he bases himself on the Makor that the Rambam brings for the mitzvah. If you're taking a look towards the bottom, page 1, the Rambam Hilchos comes to Matzah Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph. The Rambam, when he introduces the mitzvah of Sipur, he says, what's the source? Shenemar Zochar es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim, kimo shenemar Zochar es yom haShabbos. Very interesting, and the Rambam equates between the pasuk that's the source for Sipur on the Seder night and the pasuk of remembering Shabbos. And says the Keren Orah, the similarity between the two is that the chiyuv is not just to remember Shabbat on Shabbat. We're supposed to remember Shabbat all week. When you count the Shir Shel Yom, for example. The focus is on Shabbat, but the memory continues all week. Says the Keren Orah, Pesach is the same way. The focal point of our memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the Seder night, but the memory is meant to continue all year. In fact, he speaks about this being connected to the source the Rambam brings for Zechira Yetzias Mitzrayim. There are two sources one could bring for Sipur and for Zechira. One is the pasuk of Zochar es hayom hazeh. The other, that's in Shmos Perek Gimel, bottom of the page, you see it. The other is Leman Tizkar in Dvarim Perek Tezayin. The Rambam understands that Zochar is the source for the Seder night. That's the commandment. The rest of the year we learn from Leman Tizkar, which is an implication of the commandment, not the commandment. Meaning, the pasuk in Dvarim is saying, fulfill the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Don't eat chametz, eat matzah. Leman tizkar yom says that's not the tzibur, that's the implication. Says the Keren Orah, because of the way the Rambam understood the psukim, the tzibur is for the Seder night. That's the core of the mitzvah. The rest of the year is the continuation / extension of that mitzvah. According to this approach, Keren Orah, the Zohar Harakia, our question becomes even sharper. Even without this, we need to understand what the relationship between Sipur and Zechira is. But according to the Rambam, the Zechira is part of the mitzvah of Sipur. So all the more so we have to understand what's unique about Sipur. How as a focal point, does it generate something that continues through Zechira? So this is the first part of the Shir, which is to try and define Sipur in light of the other mitzvahs that it's similar to and that it coincides. In the second part of the Shir, before we get to the Haggadah, we're going to try and get a better understanding of Sipur by looking at the Mishnayos in Mesechet Psachim, in Arvei Psachim, that talk about what we do in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur. We're going to try and get a better understanding of it by looking at what we do to fulfill it. And if we take a look at page 2, the Mishnah on the Kufta Zayin and Aleph from Psachim talks about the pouring of the second cup, the mitzvah of Magid that goes along with it. We see here two important distinctions, two important definitions of the mitzvah of Sipur. The first is the format of how we do it, which is very unique and different than Zechira the rest of the year. The second is the content of what we're meant to say. Let's begin with the first. First, we're going to look at the Mishnah, top page 2, and we'll look at the Rambam's corresponding, continuing in Perek Zayin of Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah. We read Aleph Aleph. We'll read the continuing halacha where the Rambam codifies the things we're going to see in the Mishnah. First, the Mishnah talks about the format. Mazgul Kol Sheni. V'kan haben shoel aviv. Here the child asks his father the questions. Really, even though it's mentioned as one statement, we're seeing 2 points here. The source, of course, for this Mishnah is the next source, Shmos Perek Gimel, V'haya ki yish'alcha bincha machar lemor. That's the source. She'elas haben. But the truth is there's 2 components here. One is that there needs to be teaching the child. And that you see in the Smag, next source here. The Hagid livno velel tesvav nisin, you see it's fine. You don't have that by Zechira the rest. The second thing is that it should be done through question and answer. And if you look in the Rambam, second part of page 2, Halacha Beis, Halacha Gimel. Halacha Beis, the Rambam said mitzvah l'yil labanim. Halacha Gimel, the Rambam mentioned separately the issue of she'ela. And how do you know they're two separate components, even though they're mentioned together by the Mishnah? Because they're separable, and each is needed on its own. Meaning, what happens if your child doesn't ask questions? You have to teach him anyway. Let's say there's no child. Do you need to ask questions? Yes. Two separate points involving the child and asking questions. Why are these points so important? I think it's self-evident. First of all, we want to make a moment during the year where our traditions are going to be passed forward. If all we had was the mitzvah of Shir time all year round, we wouldn't have a time to pass it on. The Seder night is the moment we're told, pass this on to your child. And by the way, there are two mitzvahs in the Torah where grandparents are commanded to tell their grandchildren. And Matan Torah, Ma'amad Har Sinai. That's how critical it is. Parents and grandparents have to pass it on. The second component that we can explain the importance of question is, if a person is told information without them asking or wondering or caring about it, there's very little chance it's going to impact them. But when a person has a question, has a need, then the information they're getting is filling a hole. And we need to generate this question, this need, in order for the message we're going to give over on the Seder night to be needed. So this is the first distinction of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the format, this child and the questions. Now, if you look at the second part of the Mishnah says, based on the knowledge, the understanding of the child, the father teaches him. This makes it sound like it's very subjective. You know your child, you tell him the way you're going to tell him. Kind of like the formulation on the first line of the Mishnah. Again, it depends on the father interacting with the child. But what's interesting is that in the very next breath, the Mishnah continues and gives us objective definitions. And it tells us a number of things that need to be included. Number one, Number two, Dorish Me'aram Yavid Aviachi Makala Parshakula. Number three, Rabbi Gamliel Hayom Koshalom Shlosh Dvarim Yelu B'Pesach. The obvious question is, first we tell you whatever you want, and then we say, okay, you got to do all these things. So which one is it? Whichever you want, or all these things. And looking at the particular objective things, we want to know what the role of each one of these things is. Well, first of all, just to continue following in the Rambam in Hakotel mentions the first two things. Number two, the Rambam mentions both these things. And the question is, why do we need both? Why do we need both these things? Whichever one you need, and whichever you don't, you don't. Why do we need two things? This question becomes even sharper in the next line of the Mishnah. After mentioning mentioning Aram Yavadavi, the Mishnah then continues, Rabbi Gamliel Hayomer, what a strong statement. Well, the first things were no good. Rambam mentions this, by the way, in the next halacha hey. So the obvious question is, if these things were no good, why do we have them? Just do Rabbi Gamliel. If they were good, how come you're not Yotze? Not like l'chatchila, it'd be a nice thing to say my three things. Without my three things, you got nothing. What's pshat? Very, very surprising Mishnah. Continuing on with the Mishnah, with the content that's mentioned, later on in the Mishnah, the last paragraph here, it says, etc. It's very interesting that the Mishnah lists, seemingly as part of Magid, the saying of Halal. Very, very surprising. And the truth is, if we turn the page to page 3, you see that a number of Rishonim understood that the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim includes Hodah and Halal. If you want to look back for a second, page 1 of the Rambam, the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he mentions it. But here, two new Rishonim, the Ramban and the Chinuch, both mention it as well. And they mention Hodah as part of the mitzvah, which is surprising. Why we're telling the story need to include, that's a nice thing, Hodah, but why would it need to, as part of the mitzvah, include Hodah? In any case, I think this inclusion of Halal, Hodah, as part of the mitzvah, can help us explain a few things. Continuing on page 3. Aleph, the fact that the halachot of Sipur are applied to Halal. What do I mean? If you look at the Gemara Masechet Daf Kuf Tef in the days, Shmuel's famous drush of Lechem Oni, Lechem She'onin Alav Dvarim, the Brisa says Lechem She'onin Alav Dvarim Harbe. What are the Harbe Dvarim we're supposed to say in reference to the matzah? So Rashi says, Gomrim Alav Es HaHalel Ve'omrim Alav Haggadah. Rashi mentions Halal and Haggadah. And this could explain why, it's Harbe. It's interesting that Rashi mentions Halal first. It's one thing to mention Halal. Rashi mentions Halal as the first thing we need to say on the matzah. What a surprise. The second halacha we see of Sipur that's applied to Halal, the Ran in Megillah tells us that on the night of Pesach, it's important to be machmir to say Hallel before Chatzos. We know that you're supposed to say the Haggadah before Chatzos because the Haggadah said on the matzah, right? B'layla hazeh. But Hallel also, we're applying Dinei Sipur to the Hallel. In fact, as we continue, Ot Bet on page 3, there's an even higher level of this connection between Hallel and Haggadah. What do I mean a higher level? We all know that we learned the word Haggadah from the pasuk Shmos Perek Gimel pasuk Chet V'higadeta levincha. V'higadeta levincha. What does Haggadah mean? The Avudraham quotes a pirush that says V'yesh mefarshim third line of the Avudraham Haggadah hu lashon hodah b'shevach la'Kadosh Baruch. What a chiddush of the Avudraham that the word Haggadah means Hallel. Not just Hallel is included in the mitzvah. It's what the word Haggadah means when the Torah tells us the mitzvah. Wow! A source for this we can find in the Taragin Yonasan on the pasuk where it talks about Mikra Bikurim, Dvarim Perach Avav, Ubata El Hakohen Sheyeh B'Yamim Mehem Ve'amarti Elav Higadati Ayom. Says the Taragin Yonasan, Odinun Yoma. I thanked today. That could be a source, a much earlier source for the Avudraham. And we find many halachot that seem to express this idea of the Haggadah all being Shevach and Hallel. For example, the halachos psukos of the Gaonim quotes a halacha that the whole Haggadah has to be said over yayin. As we know, we have the Talikosos. Mishum de'ein orim shira ela ala yayin. The whole Haggadah, the whole telling of the story is shira. Wow. The Medrash Haggadah says something very similar. The Medrash Haggadah says, we find from the Torah and Nevi'im and the Ksuvim that a person needs to give Shevach and Odah la Hashem for an ace that occurs. Where do we see you need to give Shevach and Odah to Hashem for an ace that occurs? Min HaTorah dechtiv l'man tesaper v'yodei binchu ben binchu. The mitzvah of Sipur is brought as a source for the need to give Shevach al an ace. Wow. And this is how the Avudraham, very understandable, the Shitato, explains why even Chachamim, Devonim, and Zkenim need to do the mitzvah of Sipur. We all know the part in the right? In the Haggadah, Afilu Kolenu Chacham, Kolenu Devonim, Kolenu Zkenim. We all have to do. Why? Why? So the Avudraham says because we have to give Hodah. Even if we know the story, you have to give Hodah. And finally, a source for this in the Gemara, the very famous story between Rav Nachman and his slave Daru. They were trying to show that you can be Yotzei, the saying of the Haggadah without saying all the words. He said to his slave, a master who lets his slave out and gives him all kinds of money and gold, what should the slave say? He should give Hodah and Shevach. But trust in me, lower understanding, parted us from the whole need to talk about what we need to do. So again, we see how much the Hodah and Hallel is basic and may even be what the core of the Haggadah is about. So to summarize, we saw in the Mishnayos in the second part of the Shir that the mitzvah of Sipur on a technical level is unique in two ways. The format, involving the son and question and answer format. And number two, the content. The first question we ask is the Mishnah talks about subjective and then objective. 1. 2, the Mishnah talks about a lot of objective parts. What's the relationship between all these parts? And number 3, maybe the biggest chiddush in the Mishnah is that Hallel seems to be included as part of the mitzvah. So the question is, what does all this mean? And why is all of it necessary? And I think in order to answer this question, we'll now move to the third last part of the shir, which is going to be the longest part of the shir. And that is to go through the Haggadah itself. And you have two Mikoros, one is a packet and one is a sheet. The sheet here is the basics of Maggid in one sheet with 4 pages. One I have photocopy for you. But before we start looking at the actual Haggadah, I want to look at one more source, which is an important backdrop to beginning to take a look at Maggid. And that is on page 4, the Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, on the first part of Maggid in the Mishnah, Matchel Begnut U'Mesayim B'Shevach. The Gemara there asks, my Begnut, very famously, and quote the Machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says the Gnut is mitchila of the avodat gidulim ayu avotenu, a piece that appears in Yehoshua Perach of Dalet. And Shmuel says the Gnut is avodim ayinu, piece that appears in Dvarim Perach Vav. Very famous machloket. Let's look at this machloket for a minute and try and understand it, and then move to the Haggadah. If I asked you, between these two pieces, which one would be the natural piece to suggest as matchel begnut? Would you say mitchila of the avodah zarah or avodim ayinu? What? Avodah Meinu. Avodah Meinu tells the story, and that's why we all have the songs for it. Anyone here knows a song about M'chila of the Avodah Zarah Yu Avotenu? It's not by chance. That's not the core of the story. Avodah Meinu lefara b'Mitzrayim. What Shmuel suggests here, according to Taragin, it makes sense. So now the obvious question shifts back to Rav. Why does Rav use a piece that appears in the Nevi'im, right? And that seems to be less on target. What would you guys say? What does Rav's piece have that Shmuel's piece does not. What's the advantage in Rav's piece? So the Avudraham says, fourth source here on page 4, that Rav is talking about a deeper level of Gnus. People think about Gnus, they think about it in the physical plane. We were slaves, but there's a deeper idea here. We were spiritual slaves. And the truth is, if people only understand the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim as being about emancipation, Martin Luther King, they're missing a huge part of the story. The reason we were put in physical slavery is because of our spiritual slavery. It was to free us of that deeper issue. Rav wants us to gain a better appreciation, to look at more of the story, both as far as the spiritual depth and also the bigger context. Not to start the story with the enslavement, to start the story with our ancestors hundreds of years before. See the broader perspective of this story. Very understandable. In fact, this difference is very, very, very meduyik in the Rambam. If you look at the next source here, going back to what we saw earlier, the fifth source on page 4, going back to the Rambam, Perek Zayin Halacha Daled, where the Rambam talks about Matcha b'Nus and Mesayim b'Shevach, the Rambam mentions both options. But look at the verb he uses. V'tzarech Matcha b'Nus Mesayim b'Shevach. Keitzad matchilu misaper shebetchila hayu avoteinu b'mei terach, etc. Kosher. Later on, the Rambam says about the other option, after the break here, v'chein matchil umodia. What's the difference between Modia and Mesaper? Modia is to inform. Mesaper is to tell a story. The Rambam understands that Shmuel's version is just Modia. Rav's version is giving us a bigger part of the story. So let me ask you guys. We understand where Rav is coming from, right? But we understand where Shmuel is coming from. Shmuel wants to be on target. So which one should we do? Well, which one do we do? Anyone else? We do both. And now we're going to start appreciating how our Haggadah is put together. The first thing I want to say before we look at our Haggadah sheet is I want to talk about the word put together. Everybody knows that the Haggadah is not from the Torah. It's not from Tanakh, right? In fact, it wasn't even compiled by the Tanoim. We see discussions. We just saw Rav and Shmuel. We're debating what we should do. So it seems even in Rav and Shmuel's time, the Haggadah wasn't yet in the form that we have it. And we have different versions of the Haggadah. So you know what? Maybe we shouldn't take the structure of the Haggadah seriously. Because it was, put together different places, different times, Aramaic and Hebrew. And again, even though it was put together over time, if you look carefully at the Haggadah, you see very deep things of structure. And just to get started, I'll give you one example, okay? The first part of Maggid is, of course, Halach Ma'anya. We all know it, right? Halach Ma'anya ends with a very interesting line that we only find in the beginning of the Haggadah and the end of the Haggadah. What's the last line of Halach Ma'anya? Hashat Ta'acha, L'Shana Haba, Ba'arad Yisrael, right? And how does the Haggadah end? L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. One's Hebrew, one's Aramaic. You think it's by chance that the Haggadah begins and ends that way? Now, by the way, just to stop and pause for a second. For years, the idea of being in Eretz Yisrael for Pesach and being able to bring the Korban Pesach was a dream for Jews, right? It was a dream. For better, for worse, you've gotten accustomed to it. You want to come for Israel for Pesach, you sign up for a Pesach program. Or you go to your child or your relative, or you get an apartment or whatever. Right? Maybe this year we should appreciate more what it means to be able to be in Eretz Yisrael for Pesach. Not so pasha. We should daven it properly, that we should be able to be here healthy. Maybe it takes things like this for us to appreciate it. In any case, I'm just trying to talk about how they're structured. Now what I want you to notice on page 1 is how the first part of the Haggadah consists of 2 parallel frameworks that each begin with 4 questions, continue with Gnut, and then conclude with Shevach. And the 2 parallel frameworks are built around Shmuel and Rav's different forms of Gnut. Expectedly, which one is first? Which one is first? Which one should be first, Rav's or Shmuel's? I would say Shmuel's. Why? Because the advantage of Shmuel's is that it's the basic. We start with the most basic. We start with with level 1. Shmuel says, I don't have smicha, I'm not Rav, I'm not doing fancy. Let's just start with something everybody can understand. This is one of the big challenges on the Seder night. We saw earlier in the mission, right? You got to do based on the kid. But there's a lot of different people at the Seder, right? You could have the Gadol Ador like Dubai Fishman, it could be there. And you could have a little kid there. So how do you run the Seder? What I want to show you is that the Seder is built from the simple to the complex. And the irony at some starim is that you want to start the Seder with the basic ideas, and people are whipping out all these crazy, wild, divrei Torah. And the basic people don't even get a chance to get off the ground. What I want to show you is that there are more basic parts, and then there are deeper parts. The irony is, we'll see, is Arami Ovid Avi, which is the deepest part. People finish 18th Divrei Torah Manishtana, and then they get to Arami Ovid Avi, where you should go be in. They say, okay, meet you at the soup, meet you, at Dayenu, right? The Arami Ovid Avi is where people are supposed to discuss it in depth. But in any case, let's take a look together here. There are two frameworks. The first one is around Avodah Mayinu, page 1 of our Haggadah. The second one is around Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, Yu Avotenu, right? But let's look at the difference. 4 questions before each. What's the difference? The first round of 4 questions is basically one question, and they're not very deep. Why is tonight different than all the nights of the year? That's, anyone can ask that, right? The second round of 4 questions are 4 different children asking from 4 different perspectives. Whoa, right? Here we're talking about in depth. And look at the difference in the Shevach. The first Shevach after Avodah Mayinu is Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu. The Haggadah's equivalent of Rabba Dab Dab, thank you for Yeshivat Mitzrayim, right? There's no depth here. There's no deeper understanding of what's going on. Because again, we're at the basic introductory level. But then we get to round 2. Round 2, we have the 4 children, 4 perspectives. We have Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah Yu Avotenu, which gives us a deeper, broader perspective on the story. And the Shevach is very similar. What's the Shevach? Baruch Shomer Avtachato Yisrael Baruch Hu. Okay, this is a deeper, broader understanding. If we thought Avodah Mayinu, the whole story is just this slavery and emancipation, okay. But once we start earlier, Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah Yu Avotenu, and we understand that it's a story that began already Terach and Avram, and there was a Haftacha from the days of Avram. So now we can understand that there was much more going on here. Baruch Shomer Avtachos Yisrael is a Shevach that's appropriate for what it comes after. And this is part 1 of Haggadah. The 2 frameworks of Matchel and Glut Messiah B'Shevach. Any questions thus far? Okay. Let's look now at the transition from part 1 to part 2. After we say Baruch Shomer Avtachos Yisrael, we have a very famous part of the Haggadah, V'hishamna. Now I'm going to ask a question that's very simple to answer, but very hard to answer. And the reason it's very hard to answer is because every time I ask the question, people misunderstand it. Even when I explain to them what the question is. I'll explain it, and you'll misunderstand it, and we'll continue. Okay? Listen carefully. I'm not asking what the Hishamda says. I know what it says, I speak Hebrew. I'm asking, listen carefully, what is the goal of a Hishamda? Okay, everyone understood the question? Now what does it say? Don't translate it for me. What is the goal? What is the piece V'hisha Amda trying to accomplish? Everyone understands the question, right? Okay, so anyone got an answer? What's it trying to accomplish? Yes?
Recognizing Hashem, the things that Hashem does for us every generation.
That's what it says. What's the goal? Yes. Add more Shevach, for sure, but what unique thing? I'm saying, well, not just quantitative. What? Yes. To make it relevant. That's what I believe. But Gabi Katz said, to make it relevant. What's the problem on the Seder night? God took the Jewish people out of Egypt 3,500 years ago. Okay. Shkoyach. Where is the first place before V'hishamda where the Haggadah tries to create relevance? Yeah, maybe, but a stronger statement of relevance. Look at the continuation of Avodah Mayinu. 3rd line. Ve'ilu lo hotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu et avotenu miMitzrayim. Harei anu vanenu v'nei vanenu mishuv v'demayinu l'farav mitzrayim. What is that line trying to do? Create relevance. How good of a job does that do? I think it's a hard sell for 2 reasons. Number 1, historically, would we still have been slaves in Egypt? The UN wouldn't have freed us eventually. We would have been victims, so the UN would have cared, right? You know what I'm saying? Really, historically, we still would have been slaves. But there's a deeper issue here. It's hard to appreciate someone who did something for our ancestors 3,500 years ago. A number of years ago, somebody sent me a picture from Time magazine. It was a picture of an African-American boy spray painting a statue of Abraham Lincoln. And why is that sad and ironic? Because Abraham Lincoln freed his grandparents, a few generations before, 150 years ago. So what's the problem with this kid? He doesn't make the connection, he doesn't feel. Even if he studies it historically, he doesn't see it, he doesn't feel it. And that's part of the challenge of the series. How should we feel the stories that happened 35 years ago? The Hishamda has a different way of creating relevance. You agree with me there, Mr. Dan, right? Well, now what's the way of creating relevance here? That story happened 3,500 years ago, but similar things happen in every generation. Maybe the Vihi refers to the Haftacha, Pashup Shat, Baruch Shem Eftachasa. Vihi she'amda la'avoteinu v'lam. This, a way of creating relevance, becomes possible at this point in Haggadah. At this point. Let's keep this in mind because we're going to see how the Haggadah accomplishes relevance at its final point in a much stronger way. But let's now move on with our study of the Haggadah to part 2. So part 1 is Matzah L'Sayim B'Shavach, we saw the Mishnah. Part 2 is Arami Ovid Avi. In what way is Arami Ovid Avi different, adding, better, more special than the first part of the Haggadah? What does Arami Ovid Avi have that Matzah L'Sayim B'Shavach doesn't have? If you go back to the Mishnah, you go back for a second, the Mishnah, top page 2, I think it was, right? The Mishnah, when it introduces Arami Ovid Avi, what verb does it use? What verb does it use? Vidoresh. Vidoresh me Arami Ovid Avi. The Haggadah translates the verb vidoresh in what form? Look at the top of page 2. Say Ulamad, which is the Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalmi version of Tashma. Let's learn in depth. You see this in the Rambam as well, page 4, the Rambam, Perzan al-Chadalit, where we saw Matzah L'Sayim B'Shavach, the Rambam, last line, he says, V'hu she'yidrosh be'arami Ovid Avi ad she'yigmar kol haparsha, v'chol ha'mosif u'marich bidrash parsha zu harezim b'shubach. Rambam, middle of page 3. The Rambam understands that this kol ha'mesaper, right, kol ha'marba l'saper, harezim b'shubach, that's regarding Arami Ovid Avi. This is the time in the Haggadah when we go through it in depth. Matzah L'Sayim B'Shavach, that's the storyline. That's the basic storyline. Now we're supposed to get into the nitty-gritty. And just to appreciate the flow, the way the Haggadah is supposed to work is, the first part, Matzah L'Sayim is appropriate for everyone. Whoever can understand anything can understand that. The second part of Matzah L'Sayim, I don't know if that's for first graders. We were over the Avodah Zarah, I don't think get it. Arami Ovid Avi is now where we start darshan. And that's what we do. We take every pasuk of the parsha of Arami Ovid Avi and we darshan the words, right? Here is where we're supposed to go into it in depth. And again, here, this should be the longest part of the Haggadah. It is technically, but it should be as far as time spent. And what's the shevach that comes after Arami Ovid Avi? Understandably, fittingly. Turning to page 3. What's the shevach that comes after Arami? The lengthy thing of Arami Ovid Avi, what's the shevach? Dayenu. Dayenu is a song of Sheva built perfectly for an in-depth study of the story. And by the way, it's supposed to be lengthy Sheva. You can't cheat. Right? Ilu hotzianu mi mitzrayim v'lo asavayim shefatim dayenu. Die. People get Dayenu of Dayenu, and then they do the trick. You guys know the trick? Ilu, you do like, no, you got to do Dayenu after each one. Because that's the whole point of this Shavach, that it's super long and there's a super lot to talk about, right? So we've seen the first two parts of the Bible. Number 1, the Matzah L'Sayim B'Shavach storyline. Number 2, Arami Ovid Avi in-depth study. So now the question is, what do we need more for? And how dare Rabbi Gamliel have the gall to come along and say, you may have done that, that's very nice. But if you don't do my 3 things, lo yatzeh yadech l'maseh. Really? Now you understand the earlier things well. This is a very hard thing to understand. What's pshat? So I think the answer to this hinges on understanding what comes right after Rabbi Gamliel. And it comes right after Rabbi Gamliel in the Mishnah, in the Rambam, in the Shulchan Aruch, everywhere. What comes after Rabbi Gamliel? You can look at it in the Rambam, go back to the Mishnah, you can look in the Haggadah. What comes right after Rabbi Gamliel? Anyone? Shh. What comes after Rabbi Gamliel in all these sources? Anyone? That's part of his thing, right? What? Here's the trick. If you want to know what's different about the Seder night, all the things we said until now are true. But the biggest difference, and the goal, and how Sipur is most different than Zechira, is that the goal isn't to commemorate. The goal is to re-experience. Now the challenge is, how do you get from commemoration to re-experience. How do you get from one to the other? You can do a PhD, you can study something, but how do you come to experiencing it? So let's think about it in our own times. People have reenactments, right? They have a reenactment of the Civil War. Right? So the first thing you got to do is you got to study it in depth, right? If you don't know what happened, you can't reenact it. Once you know what happened, you go back to the place. You put on the uniforms, you have the gun, you chew the tobacco, right? And if you know enough about the story, you put yourself in the situation that is reminiscent of it, you can come to reenact it. That's why the objects are so important. And that gets back to our original question. You want to know how Sipur is different than Zechira? Because Sipur is inextricably linked to the mitzvah it coincides with. It's a story we re-experience by having the relics that aren't just relics, the stopwatch they happen to have in the Civil War. I don't have one. These are very meaningful objects. Pesach, Matzah, and Maror are important parts of the story. We don't have the time today to talk about why Pesach, Matzah, and Maror are so important. But they're what made Yetzias Mitzrayim possible. And by having the objects in front of us, connecting the story to the objects, we can traverse time and re-experience it. And that's why Rabbi Gamliel is the transition to B'chol Dor V'Dor. And you're not Yotze without it. You're not Yotze without it because the goal is to re-experience. And you can study it very well. But if you don't re-experience, you haven't been Yotze the mitzvah. And I think you see this beautifully. What did Rabbi Gamliel say? Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach lo yatsa yedei chovato, right? B'chol Dor V'Dor chayiv adam lirus esatzmo. You know why you're not Yotze your chova without Rabbi Gamliel? Because the chova is to re-experience what happened. Looking more closely now at B'chol Dor V'Dor, this is the third attempt to create relevance of the story to us. But this obviously is on a much, much higher level. And you can see how this stage relates to what came earlier. What do I mean? If you look at the bottom of page 4, I reprinted Abba Demeinu on the right side. Etc., right? What do we say now? It's almost like the paragraph of B'chol Dor V'Dor is responding to the paragraph of Abba Demeinu. Don't think it was just them. It's us too. And not B'chol Dor V'Dor, similar things happen. But B'chol Dor V'Dor, this happens. Wow. This is obviously a much higher level of relevance that the Haggadah is slowly building up to. And now we can understand very well the next part of the Haggadah that's linked to this part of the Haggadah. How do you know the next part of the Haggadah is linked? What's the next word after B'chol Dor V'Dor? What's the next word? Lefichach anachnu chayavim. And if it was a commemoration, I don't know if we'd be chayav. But because we're experiencing it, so we're chayav to give up. Lo yatzu yedei chovato, b'chol dor v'dor chayav adam l'rus esatzmo, lefichach anachnu chayavim. Lefichach anachnu chayavim. Right? Because we're experiencing it. And now we can understand very well why Hallel and Hodar are included in the mitzvah of Sipur. Because the mitzvah of Sipur isn't commemorating, it's experiencing. And if you look at the next page, we can now understand a lot of the amazing things that we're told by the Rishonim the Achronim about Hallel. The first, most famously, quoted the name of Rav Haigon from his Tshuva. Why do we have a bracha on Hallel at the Seder nights? So why don't we make the bracha ligmor Hallel? So the Ran quotes Rav Haigon who says, "She'inanu koras b'Torah's korin, ela b'Torah's omrim shira." Hallel on the Seder night is different. It's not kriyas Hallel. It's shiras Hallel. It's shiras Hallel. And we find this in the Rimigash, which is the source. I printed the Tshuva of the Rimigash. But I want to focus a little bit on how the Ran quotes it. The Ran, third line says, Shekach Shaninu, Rabbi Gamliel Omer v'chulei. Why does the Ran quote Rabbi Gamliel when he wants to talk about Hallel? You understand the point I'm making? It's Rabbi Gamliel that allows the Hallel to be this way. Uveseifa lefichach anu chayavim, etc. The Maharal of Haggadah Lashon Lemudim also speaks about this Rav Haigon and elaborates on it. And again, we can understand very well. What is the Hallel we say right after Magid? B'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim. Looking back at our Haggadah sheet, page 4. Right? We say B'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim. And what we're supposed to be feeling when we say B'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim is not that the Jews left Mitzrayim 3,500 years ago. We're supposed to be feeling B'tzeis Yisrael mitzrayim. We're on the way. And the climax of the Magid and the Hallel is, of course, the Baruch HaSageula, the bracha that we say on the mitzvah of Sipur, not at the beginning, but when we reach this moment. And what's the bracha that we say? Let's look inside, towards the bottom page. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher ge'alanu. Well, maybe that means the royal we, it doesn't mean us, right? Asher ge'alanu Ga'alat Aseinu. So it's clear that Ga'alanu means we, us. And we're saying it at this point because we are truly experiencing what we're supposed to be experiencing on the Sabbath. Just to complete the flow of this year and complete our overview of the Haggadah, let's now turn the page on the bottom of the page here, the bottom of the page, to talk about, not literally turn the page, figuratively turn the page to Hallel after the meal. Very unique thing. We have Hallel before the meal and Hallel after the meal. What is the difference? What are we adding in Hallel after the meal? So the Abar Ben El in his Haggadah Zevach Pesach, basically summarizes the most basic difference, and he says that the Haggadah after the meal is where we speak about the Gula in the future. We're mafik, we celebrate what we're experiencing now. What's the relationship between the two? And I think the answer is very simple. When a person experiences Gula, it's easier to believe in the future Gula. That's the goal of the Siddur. To experience the Geula of the past and the present in a way that we can be more emboldened and inspired to believe in the Geula of the future. And this is an idea that the Smak expresses beautifully in his Sefer HaMitzvos, in the first mitzvah. First mitzvah, Noach Hashem Elokecha took us out of Mitzrayim. And of course, what bothers everyone is what's the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah a commandment to believe in God? Can you command someone to believe? So the Smak says, if it's a dibur, it must be a mitzvah, and the dibur, the mitzvah is, Kishem shani rotze, shetaminu bi shani otzeiti etchem, kach ani rotze shetaminu bi, shani Hashem Elokechem v'ani ated l'kabetz etchem Moshe. The belief in Yetzias Mitzrayim is meant to engender a belief in the future Geula. That's what it means. Because again, Emunah doesn't just mean that you believe that God exists. It means that you believe God is involved. And this is an idea that we find explained by the Orach Chaim in Bamidbar, in the words of Bilam, where he described Yetziat Mitzrayim as taking place in the present. Kel motziam, present, mi Mitzrayim. What's pshat? The Orach Chaim says, because we re-experience this every year. And Rav Kook extended this all the way to our time in his Sefer Yisrael B'Tchiyato. He writes, Ha'geula nimshechet liva olechet. It continues happening. Geulat Mitzrayim u'geulat ha'atid ha'shlema hi pe'ula achat she'eina poseket. Geula from Egypt and the future complete Geula is one long, non-ceasing action. See Mitzrayim in the present. And that's, of course, what we express from Rosh Chodesh mention. Misha asanisim, la'avotenu, v'ga'alotam yavdu l'cherut, hu yigalotanu v'karov, v'kavishni d'chenu, etc. We have to use the experience, not just commemoration, but for sure the experiences of Geula in the present, the past and the present, to inspire the future. And this is a very, very important idea. Yetziat Mitzrayim is the basis of our relationship with God. If our relationship with God is going to be a vibrant one, Yetziat Mitzrayim has to be something we experience. And that's why Yetziat Mitzrayim and Har Sinai are the only two events in Jewish history we're commanded to identify with in a way that we experience. Har Sinai we believe we were all at, and Yetziat Mitzrayim we all re-experience. The second aspect of the Hallel after the meal is that we speak about seeing God in everything in our world, seeing God in nature, seeing God in the hidden Nisim. A very famous piece of the Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo, where he talks about the fact that we have so many mitzvahs that are Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? Why have so many mitzvahs? How many mitzvahs are there connected to Har Sinai? The Ramban writes that the reason why is because Yetziat Mitzrayim was meant to give people a basis for belief. And God isn't going to come to every kofar in every generation and disprove their thoughts. And then after the Ramban speaks about this, he has a few lines that are very powerful, very famous, and very important. Towards the bottom of the Ramban, he writes, next page, from the great famous Nisim, through the great well-known open Nisim, a person can come to recognize the hidden Nisim, which are the Yesod of all Torah. A person doesn't have a chelik in the Torah of Moshe. Ad shenamin b'chol dvarenu u'mikrenu shekulam nisim. Until we recognize that everything going on, even nature, is really an ace. Ein ben teva. There is no nature as people assume it to be. Bein b'rabin, bein b'yochid. Elim yasa ha'mitzvos yatzchenu scharo, v'im yavar aleim yachmisenu onsho. Hakol b'tzeres ol. Again, the implication of realizing that even nature is God-driven is that what we do determines it. And this is obviously something that we need to realize at times like this as well. We take nature for granted. There are forces of nature that God puts in motion, that God is behind in driving things in the direction they go. Very similar thing in the Chinuch Mitzvah Chafei, Talmud of the Ramban, it seems, where he talks about the mitzvah of Emunah, to see that things come from God and to not allow ourselves to tell ourselves that things happen by chance. And the truth is, we see this on the last page of the Mekoros, in two famous Gemaras, Chulin and Erchin. The Gemara in Chulin Daf Zayin says, even if a person just pricks his finger here, it happens for a reason above. Now, I don't think that means a person should be neurotic, and every time they prick their finger, they have to have 40 days of tanis. But even the small things that happen in our life, we have to think about. Is there a message here for me? There's a reason why this happened. Now, what's the message? In a very similar way, the Gemara in Erchin Daf Zayin says that Yisurin, the concept of Yisurin, the message for us is even if you reach your hand into your pocket and pull out the wrong coin, the wrong number of coins, there's a reason. There's a message. This is a very important thing. And if we want to see it in the statement of a scientist, Albert Einstein famously said, there are only two ways to live your life. Well, one is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. To realize how far it goes from one extreme to the other. So hopefully, as the Ramban said, by appreciating the great Nisim, we can come to appreciate the standard hidden Nisim. Just to conclude, this is a very important concept for us in re-experiencing Yetzias Mitzrayim. And I think there's an additional one as well. And that's a concept that we find in the Sefer Atanya in Chelik Rishon. He writes there that B'chol dor v'dor, v'chol yom v'yom. Whoa. This is a big chiddush because, B'chol dor v'dor chayav l'mitzvah was a chorah once a year, right? What does it mean? So the Sfas Emes writes, Va'emes ki b'chol eis yesh mitzarim b'chol esh mitzvah. Every Jew has their limitations all the time. L'chein maskirin b'chol yom Yetzias Mitzrayim. U'kefi ma sheyodin v'zochim she'Hashem yisbarach hotzion. A person faces limits, self-perceived limits all the time. And the question is whether they believe that they can transcend those limits. Now, if a person tells himself, I'm Kobe Bryant, I'm Michael Jordan, I can transcend anything, I'm so great. That's sheker, right? But if a person understands that they have God with them, Kel Motzia Mi Mitzrayim, they realize that there really are no limits. And especially at a time like this, but at all times in our life, we need to realize the things that we don't yet realize about ourselves, the potential we have to accomplish that we're not yet seeing, and to push ourselves to accomplish it. This is a very important thing. And everybody should think about this. How do I help myself succeed? How do I take responsibilities to myself? How do I extend beyond my limitations? Or do I assume I'm limited and I shrink and I fear? So these are very important things. And may this shir on the Haggadah and on the essence of Secret Yetzias Mitzrayim serve as a good introduction to your learning of the Haggadah and about the mitzvahs of Lala Seder in an in-depth and meaningful way. Gabi, you know how to turn this off? Because I don't. I'm watching Gabi turn this off. It's great to see everyone. Let's continue learning together over the next days and weeks. Shekach to Shane and everyone who's arranging in the shirim or on Facebook and on the YouTube list. Enjoy.